Hi poetry lovers, welcome to my channel Bella Poetry. My name is Bella and I love beautiful poetry. In this segment of our second series, The Best Love Poetry and the Poets That Penned It, we will discuss another famous American poet, Edward Estlin Cummings, who was also known as E. E. Cummings. He was an American poet, a writer, a painter, a playwright, and an essayist. E. Cummings wrote approximately 2,900 poems, 2 autobiographical novels, 4 plays, and a few essays. He is often regarded as one of the most important American poets of the 20th century. Cummings is associated with the modernist free-form poetry. Much of his work has very individualized syntax. He uses lowercase spellings for poetic expression. E. E. Cummings was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts on October 14, 1894. His father was a professor at Harvard University who later became nationally known minister of South Congregational Unitarian Church in Boston, Massachusetts. His mother, who loved to spend time with her children, played games with Cummings and his sister Elizabeth. From an early age, Cummings' parents encouraged his creative endeavors. He began writing poetry very early when he was only 8 years old in 1904, and also started learning pretty early in his life Latin and Greek at the Cambridge Latin High School. Cummings wanted to be a poet from childhood, and he wrote consistently, as I said, from the age of 8 to the age of 22. But he wasn't just writing, he was experimenting and exploring assorted poetic forms. He graduated from Harvard University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1915 and just a year later with a Master of Arts degree in 1916. In his studies at Harvard, he developed an interest in modern poetry, which ignored, as we said before, conventional grammar and syntax. He wanted to use a dynamic language, a simple dynamic language. When he graduated from the university, he started working for a book dealer and he was quite bored. In 1917, at the age of 23, Cummings published an early selection of poems in the anthology 8 Harvard Poets. And the same year, looking for adventure, I guess, he left the United States for France as a volunteer ambulance driver in World War I. He and his friend William Slater Brown were known to prefer the company of French soldiers over fellow ambulance drivers, and they were not shy about expressing their political views and anti-war views mostly. On September 21, 1917, 5 months after starting the assignment, Cummings and William Slater Brown were arrested by the French military on suspicion of espionage and undesirable activities. They held the 2 men for 3.5 months in a detention camp in Normandy. Obviously, Cummings' family was very worried about him. His father used all kinds of different diplomatic channels to release his son, to no avail. Finally, frustrated, he wrote a letter to President Woodrow Wilson in December 1917. And Cummings was released because of this letter on December 19, 1917, returning to his family in the United States by New Year's Day. After the war, he settled into a life divided between his lifetime summer home called Joy Farm in New Hampshire, Greenwich Village where he has an apartment, and frequent visits to Paris. He traveled around Europe. He met a lot of writers, poets, and artists. Among them was Pablo Picasso, that had a huge influence and impact on E. Cummings. In 1920, the Dial published 7 more poems by Cummings, including Buffalo Bill. Then Cummings returned to Paris in 1921 and lived there for 2 more years before finally returning to New York. His first collection of poetry, Tulips and Chimneys, was published in 1923 when he was 29 years old. And his inventive use of grammar and syntax was very evident in this and the following collection that made him very popular with young people because he talked about the themes that were interesting to them, as war and sex. The poet and critic Randall Jarrell once noted that Cummings is one of the most individual poets who ever lived. During his lifetime, Cummings received a number of honors, including an Academy of American Poets Fellowship, 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, the Charles Eliot Norton Professorship at Harvard, the Bollingen Prize in Poetry in 1958, and a Ford Foundation grant. In 1926, when Cummings was 30 years old, a terrible accident happened. It was a car crash, and in this car crash, his father died and his mother was very badly injured. This accident had a tremendous impact on E. Cummings, his life and his poetry. He started to address more important aspects of life in his poetry. He started his new period by paying homage to his father in the poem, "My Father Moved Through Dooms of Love." In 1952, his alma mater, Harvard University, awarded Cummings an honorary seat at Harvard as a guest professor. Cummings spent the last decade of his life traveling, fulfilling speaking engagements, and spending time in his summer home called Joe Pride in New Hampshire. If we talk about Cummings' private life, personal life, it was pretty eventful as well. He was married briefly twice, first to Elaine Orr Thayer, then to Anne Minnerly Barton. And his longest relationship that lasted over about 3 decades was with the model and photographer Marian Morehouse. Cummings' first marriage to Elaine Orr began as a love affair in 1918. It actually lasted for a few years because she was a married woman. She was married to his best friend from Harvard, whose name was Scofield Thayer. During the time, he wrote a good deal of erotic poetry, probably influenced by his very passionate relationship with Elaine Orr. The couple had a daughter while Orr was still married to Thayer. After Orr divorced Thayer, Cummings and Orr married on March 19, 1924. Thayer has been registered as the girl's father while he was married to Elaine Orr, but after the divorce, Cummings legally adopted the child after he married Orr. Although his relationship with Orr, as I said before, lasted for a few years, when they got married, they separated only after 2 months of marriage and divorced after almost 9 months later. Cummings married his second wife, Anne Minnerly Barton, on May 1st, 1929, when he turned 35 years old, and they separated 3 years later in 1932. In 1934, after his separation from his second wife, Cummings met Marian Morehouse, and although it's not clear where they were formally married, Morehouse lived with Cummings until his death in 1962. He died of a stroke on September 3rd, 1962, at the age of 67, at Memorial Hospital in North Conway, New Hampshire. Marion Morehouse died 7 years later in May 18, 1969, while living at 4 Patchen Place in Greenwich Village, New York City, where Cummings had resided since September 1924. Cummings was buried at Forest Hill Cemetery in Boston, Massachusetts. And at the time of his death, Cummings was recognized as the second most widely read poet in the United States after Robert Frost. And as usual, I will read to you a couple of quotes by E. Cummings. The first one: "Yours is the light by which my spirit's born. You're my sun, my moon, and all my stars." And the second one: "Love is the voice under all silences. The hope which has no opposite in fear, the strength so strong, mere force is feebleness, the truth more first than sun, more last than star." And we'll read 2 love poems by E. Cummings. The first one is called "I Carry Your Heart with Me. I carried it in my heart." I carry your heart with me. I carried it in my heart. I'm never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear. And whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling. I fear no fate, for you are my fate, my sweet. I want no world, for beautiful you are my world, my true, and it's you are whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing is you. Here is the deepest secret nobody knows. Here is the root of the root and the bud of the bud and the sky of a tree called life, which grows higher than soul can hope or mind can hide. And this is the wonder that's keeping the stars apart. I carry your heart. I carry it in my heart. And the second poem is called "Love is More Thicker Than Forget." Love is more thicker than forget, more thinner than recall, more seldom than a wave is wet, more frequent than to fall. It is most mad and moonly, and less it shall unbe than all the sea, which only is deeper than the sea. Love is less always than to win, less never than alive, less bigger than the least begin, less littler than forgive. It is most sane and sunly, and more it cannot die than all the sky, which only is higher than the sky. And with this segment, with this poem, we'll finish this segment of Bella Poetry Presents. In our next segment, we will talk about the very prolific life of another American poet, Langston Hughes. Thank you very much for visiting our channel, Bella Poetry Presents. Hope to see you again. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye. Oh, I forgot. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support is extremely important. Thanks again. Bye-bye.